All right, we are about an hour away from the sell job of all sell jobs at the White House, this time with congressional Democrats meeting with the president, and it is a all-out effort to try to keep them in line, or as many in line, to support that Iranian deal. Welcome, everybody. I'm Neil Cavuto. And just in case you think the administration is only worried about Republicans and all their angst about this Iranian deal, think again. Because this fellow was giving John Kerry a heck of a grilling in Congress yesterday. And by the way, he's a Democrat. Have a look.
Let's say Congress doesn't take your advice. We override a veto. And the law that's triggered then imposes certain sanctions. Will you follow the law even though you think it violates this agreement clearly, and even if you think it's absolutely terrible policy?
I can't begin to answer that at this point without consulting with the president and determining what the circumstances are.
So you're not committed to following the law?
No,
if you think
I said I'm not going to deal with a hypothetical. That's all.
All right, to that, Congressman, California Democrat Brad Sherman, he will be among the Democrats meeting with the president. And Congressman, I appreciate you taking the time ahead of that. You know, people who know you know that you are a fair and balanced critic, whether it's with Republicans or Democrats. So my hat's off to you on that. If things don't add up to you, you make it well known. But in this case, you were raising serious reservations about this deal and whether you're privy to all the aspects of it. If you meet with the president in a little over an hour, what are you going to ask him?
Well, we'll see what other questions are asked and how I can build on those. I am concerned, as I asked the Secretary of State, whether if Congress overrides the president's veto, if we impose by statute various sanctions or reimpose them, whether the executive branch will follow that law. Keep in mind, George W. Bush violated our sanctions law on Iran every day for 8 years. That sounds unusual because you think George W. Bush must have been really tough on Iran. All of our sanctions laws were sanctions against international oil companies, and not a single one of them was enforced. It got laughable as we would prove to the administration again and again that this or that oil company had made an investment in the Iranian oil sector, triggering American sanctions, and they would say, nah, we don't want to deal with that. So having lived through so many years with presidents deliberately ignoring the statutes, deliberately violating the law during the Bush administration, I'd like to know, before I vote on the law that will be before us in September, whether this president will follow it.
Now, there have been criticism of Republican and Democratic administrations alike on how they might be playing fast and loose when it comes to international agreements of any sort. But here, there's a lot we don't know. And I know a lot of your colleagues are concerned on the right and the left about side deals and the like. Now we can get into the weeds here on all of that, and you know this better than I do. But is it your sense that the votes are there to override a presidential veto, assuming it comes to that?
No. I think it's pretty unlikely. This town of Washington is pretty partisan. The president can usually count on an overwhelming majority of his own party. That was different on the trade deal, where all the Democratic grassroots were on one side and the president was on the other. But this is a more typical circumstance, and so a lot of my colleagues are studying this deal. They'll spend a month out in their districts talking to people, so it's hard to predict. But at this stage, I would say no, there are not the votes to override a veto. And what concerns me is that if the Speaker puts up a vote on overriding a veto, knowing that the veto will not be overridden, it sends a confused message to the world, because the proponents of the deal can then celebrate their victory, even if it's a 35% to 65% victory.
So even though this deal would be rejected in both the House and the Senate, don't try to go for the override? Is that what you're saying?
I would say if you go for the override, knowing you don't have it, the international effect of that is to make people think that this is a ratified treaty, because they will see a headline, President Obama's Iran deal wins big victory in the United States Congress.
Even though it
So
doesn't. But, you know, that's what confuses me, sir, that even though it doesn't, it was rejected. They're not aware of our arcane politics and that it requires a two-thirds vote and all that. I understand it. But it would have been rejected in both houses, most likely, to your point, not close enough to override a veto. Is that how you think it would be interpreted?
I fear it would be, and I think that the giant celebration by the proponents of the agreement would just tend a little bit more to lock in future presidents and future Congresses.
Oh, okay, I understand
My
what
main
you're saying.
goal
Yeah.
is to make it clear to the world this isn't a treaty. This is certainly not a ratified treaty. This isn't an executive legislative agreement. This is the lowest
But it would
level
be a
of
done
international
deal. But it would be a
handshake.
done deal. In that event, it would be a done deal. In fact, many argue, who are lawyers, tell me that because it went right to the UN Security Council first, it doesn't matter what we do. That this deal sticks, and with our key partners in the UN, they will start lifting those sanctions and providing billions of dollars in what was once frozen money to Iran like pronto. So guys like you and what you're trying to do and trying to address become a moot point.
That's clearly the strategy, and even many of the opponents of the deal believe that both sides will follow it or mostly follow it no matter what Congress does for the first year, because Iran needs to get its tens of billions of dollars. So they will probably go through implementation date, which is a defined term, 6 to 9 months from now. What I hate about this deal is the long term, when Iran, after 10 to 15 years, is allowed to have unlimited stockpiles, unlimited numbers of centrifuges. This deal is the good and the bad at the beginning and the truly ugly next decade. And we have to make it clear to the American people that we've got to force a renegotiation.
All right. Congressman, thank you very much. I've got some good news. The good news, you were great on this show. The bad news is that meeting's been rescheduled for 4:15, so you better get hopping. All right, we'll watch what happens there. In the meantime, we've got another terror incident in this country, or one that came very, very close. His name is Arafat Naji. He traveled to Turkey only a few months ago, maybe repeatedly, and tried to join ISIS. He also might have a connection with that Lackawanna 6. Remember them, the terrorists who went abroad right before 9/11? Anyway, we're getting scant details on this, but that he was planning or looking to do something untoward or even violent here. So much we don't know. To retired four-star General Jack Kane, who says he knows this much. This kind of story keeps repeating itself. General, what do you make of this?
Well, the good news here is that the very aggressive director of the FBI, Comey, and what he's doing with his 50 field officers, I mean, they are really pursuing this as a top priority, and so we got this guy. Good news. And what is alarming is that he's conducting investigations in all 50 states for people similar to this. They're ongoing about people who are being inspired by ISIS. The other piece of good news here is this guy got turned in by his neighbors. That's exactly what must take place. People have to be sensitive to what's going on around them. They hear that jihad language coming out and adverse behavior. Call the FBI, call local police, and let's get some officials on top of it.
We are told, to your point, General, that it was his travel to Turkey. We're trying to nail down the times he was there that got authorities' attention. But again, that's technically profiling when they focus on something like that, and that raises all sorts of issues with freedom folks who say, no, don't even do that. But obviously that was crucial to finding this guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, this is tough because when the Al-Qaeda was dealing with their folks and trying to motivate them, they vetted them. And then they would provide detailed instructions. There was a dialogue back and forth, and you can actually track that, and that's how we were able to uncover it. ISIS sits back there in their headquarters in Raqqa and makes a general appeal to motivate and inspire people based on their ideology and based on their internet messages, and then they let the people do what they're motivated to do. And there's hardly any dialogue going on with hundreds of people around the world that are so motivated. Much more difficult for law enforcement to get their hands around these people.
But one of the things I noticed, General, is that the gravitating to disaffected or angry Americans, maybe of Muslim descent or what have you, but that they're angry, they're bitter, they feel that good life here has passed them by, or they're just angry. And that is something on which ISIS seems to pounce.
Yeah, certainly that's part of the motivation. And I think there's not much we can do about that. There'll always be people, part of societies, ours and across the globe, who have a certain degree of disenchantment with what's taking place with their own lives, and they have a tendency maybe to blame their government for that far too much. Most of it has a lot to do with themselves.
Right, right.
This thing isn't going to go away until we actually close the door on ISIS. When we take Syria away from ISIS and we take Iraq away from ISIS and we de-glamorize them and they start to lose, then there'll be considerably less appeal and motivation on the part of people to be radicalized by them.
General, thank you. Good seeing you again.
Yeah, good talking to you as always, Neil.
All right, General Kane. I want to switch you to Washington, back to Washington. Another hearing going on ahead of the big one at the White House, now just 5 minutes away. This one on the IRS. Now, remember, the president was telling Jon Stewart just last week that there's no there, that there's nothing that the IRS has done untoward or remarkable. You have the IRS director, Koskinen, there, among those that the White House is defending, but a lot of Republican leaders are saying he should go. He's not handing over things fast enough, quickly enough, or at all, and that the better part of valor would be for Koskinen to, just leave. That's not happening, but it is getting ugly. The fallout from that after this.